Welcome to this video demonstration of Dell Fabric Manager. Dell Fabric Manager is a software tool that automates the deployment of data center networking fabrics. In this video, we are going to deploy a data center fabric from scratch in about 30 minutes. Auto configuration, auto documentation, auto design, and auto validation. My name is Brad Hedlund. I'm an enterprise technologist at Dell. So let's take a look at the actual gear that we're going to be using in this demonstration. I don't have this gear in my basement. I am accessing gear that is in the Dell Solution Centers. So this is gear that not only I can access, but you as a customer, potential customer, can visit the Dell Solution Center and see this gear. You can also schedule a briefing or demonstration with your Dell account team. So what we have in the Dell Solution Center is two Z9000 spine switches. We also have 4 S4810 leaf switches, and this is all pre-cabled with 40 gigabit connections. So each 4810 has 4 40 gig links going to the Z9000 spine layer. We also have a terminal server here, which is going to give us console access to all these switches so we can see what is happening on the switch as Dell Fabric Manager is doing its job. We also have a out-of-band management network here, so this is connecting to all of the management interfaces on the Z9000s and S4810s. And on that same management network, that is where we have Dell Fabric Manager connected to. So Dell Fabric Manager here is running in a CentOS virtual machine, and we also have DHCP and TFTP running on that machine as well, the two other services that Dell Fabric Manager uses to deploy the fabric. Now, as I'm going through Dell Fabric Manager, I have a specific set of requirements in mind, or I have a topology in mind that I want to deploy. So in my case, I want to deploy a fabric with 40 gig interlinks from my 4810s to Z9000s. I want to also have 3-to-1 oversubscription for my servers. So my servers are going to be connecting to this top of rack switch here. In this case, it's going to be my leaf switch, and I want 3-to-1 oversubscription there. So I'm going to have 160 gig of uplink bandwidth and as many as 48 10 gig servers connected to the leaf switch. Now I'm going to start out with 2 switches, leaf 1 and leaf 2, but this fabric is going to grow in the future, so I've got 2 other 4810s here that I plan to add at some point in the future, not today, but I want to plan for that capacity, so we're going to provide those inputs to DFM. And we also have 2 pretend routers out here. These are probably data center routers, WAN routers, what have you. This is how our fabric is going to link to the outside world. So we're going to take the connections from those routers and we're going to connect them to our leaf switches, and those will be called uplinks. And we see the IP addresses here of those routers, and we can also see that they're running OSPF in area 0. So what we'll do is we'll provision a different area in our fabric. Here I'm going to use OSPF 1, and we'll provide that input to Dell Fabric Manager as we go through the design process. Once the design is done, I'm going to go through the deployment phase where DFM will automatically configure all of the switches in this fabric, automatically configure all of the OSPF settings, all of the other required configurations to build this fabric. DFM is also going to auto-deploy the software on all of these switches. So at the end of the day, I'm going to have a fabric that was completely configured by an automation tool, by DFM, and nobody had to get into a CLI on any of the switches and pound away at any networking OSPF configurations. All of that will be done automatically by DFM per the design template that we pick and per the inputs that we put in. And also, once the design is done, DFM is going to go back, and it's going to go back to each switch and validate that the configuration was deployed successfully and correctly, and that all of the cabling is correct too. It's going to check that all of the appropriate neighbors are present on each interface, on each cable, and it will give us a successful validation message when that is done. So let's get into the demo. Okay, let's start this demonstration of Dell Fabric Manager. So here's my desktop, and I have console access to 4 switches. I have my leaf 1 switch here, leaf 2, spine 1, spine 2. My leaf is a S4810. My spines are Z9000s. These switches are completely blank. They have no configuration at all. I'll just do a show startup config. There's nothing there. It's as if these are just brand new switches with absolutely no configuration. They are pre-cabled in that leaf spine fabric, but we're going to use Dell Fabric Manager to automate the complete deployment of this fabric, and we'll show the complete configuration when we're done. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my browser to Dell Fabric Manager and log in. I will log in as super user. Okay, here we are. And before we get started, let's take a quick look at the administration settings. And this is where I've set up the IP address of the TFTP server, which happens to be the same machine running Dell Fabric Manager. I've also set up SNMP read and write credentials and the IP address of a trap host for SNMP. I've also set up the CLI credentials and the CLI protocol that I want Dell Fabric Manager to use with the switches. So this will be the username and password installed on the switches, and we're going to use SSH. I can put other things in here such as a syslog IP address, and this will be what Dell Fabric Manager programs the switches with as their syslog server. Okay, so let's go back to our getting started page here. And now I'm going to create my first core design. So the word core here is just another term for the fabric or the leaf spine fabric. It refers to Dell distributed core, which is really the term Dell is using for the leaf spine fabric. So I'm going to create my first core design. This is the intro welcome page. I can skip this, click next. Now I'm going to give this design a name. I'm going to call it demo. And you can put in a description. I'll just say video demo here. And now on the core type here, I'm picking from some predefined templates. I'm going to pick type 2. And type 2 results in the spine device of Z9000, the leaf device of S4810. That's what I want. 40 gig interconnects, that's what I want. And here's a number of servers, or 10 gig ports, that will be available on the leafs at a maximum in this design. That works for me. And I can also pick the oversubscription I want in my fabric. I'm going to leave the default setting here of 3:1. I could also pick 5:1, but I'll just pick 3:1 because that's what I want. And here we see a basic naming example of what these switches will be named: demo-spine1, demo-leaf1, etc. Click next. Okay, so I have to have 2 uplink ports at minimum, and remember those are the 2 links that are going to the data center routers or the WAN routers to the outside world. So I've got those 2 there, and the downlink ports are going to be 94. These are going to be my first sets of servers, 94 servers connecting to my leaf layer. So with the 94 server ports and 2 uplink ports, that's a total of 96. I've got 2 48 port switches, S4810, so that's going to result in 2 initial leaf switches in my design. And that's what I want. Now I'm also going to tell Dell Fabric Manager what the future looks like. So in the future, I'm not planning on adding any more uplinks. I'll set 0 there, but I'm going to add 96 more servers in the future, 2 additional leaf switches at some point. We want to provide these inputs now so that we can plan ahead for those. Click next. Here we're asked for the interlink configuration. These are the links between the leaf and the spine. We're going to run OSPF. That's grayed out. That's the only protocol we're supporting right now. And I will click Configure Protocol Settings here, and I will pick the OSPF area number for my fabric. And I will choose Area 1. Click OK. And now I'm going to provide a range of IP addresses for those interlinks. DFM will use this to assign /30s to those interlink links. And I'm also going to provide a range of addresses for the loopback addresses on all the switches. DFM will use this, chop it up into /32s, and assign those to the switches. So I'll click Next here. Now about those uplinks going to those data center routers. DFM wants to know more about the routing protocol running there. It is OSPF in my case. It could be BGP, but my routers are OSPF. And we'll configure those links here by specifying what is the IP address on my end of those 2 links. Well, on the first link, I'm going to be 10.253.1.1, and the neighbor on the other end is 10.253.1.2, and that's running area 0. With the other link, 10.253.1.5, And the other router's 10.253.1.6, and we're running area 0 on that link as well. We'll click OK, click Next. Now those downlinks from the leaf switches going down to the servers. Since I'm using my leaf switch as the top of rack, I'm going to check this box here that says Enable Leaf as the top of rack. And we're going to provide DFM a starting VLAN number to provision on those leaf switches for the servers to be adjacent to. So I'll start with VLAN 10, and I'm going to provide a range of addresses that we're going to use for the servers. So DFM will use that and provision that appropriately across the leaf switches on those VLAN interfaces. So I'll click Next here. Now we see a basic topology of what we've done so far. Based on the inputs I provided, we have 2 spine switches, and I can click on those and see how those are cabled. I can see I've got 2 leaf switches here, leaf 1 and leaf 2 for my first 94 servers, and then here's leaf 3 and leaf 4 for those 96 server ports in the future. So everything looks good here, and I can go ahead and click Next. Here we see a quick summary of the design, everything we've provided as inputs. Here's the design template we chose, Type 2 medium core. Here is the amount of uplinks and downlinks, current and future, range of IP address for the servers, the IP addresses on my uplinks, 40 gig interconnects. We're running OSPF as the Fabric routing protocol. And at the bottom I can also see if I was going to use copper cables, DFM is providing a suggestion here of what the quantity of cables you're going to need to build this design. Or if you choose optic cables, here's the quantity of optic cables and the type of optics and the quantity of those optics you're going to need to build this design. So I can take note of that. Now when I click Finish here, DFM is going to ask me if I want to view the wiring plan for this fabric. Absolutely. I'm going to click Yes here. I can view both the table data or a graphical wiring plan, or both. I'll just choose both and click Generate. And what has happened now is DFM has auto-generated that PDF file and downloaded it to my desktop. I can just open it here, and here we can see the wiring plan that DFM just auto-generated. So I can scroll down here and I can see the names of the switches. I can see the port numbers on those switches and what other switch is cabled to that port. And I can scroll down and I can see the switches I'm going to plan for the future. Here's the future switches listed and the switches that I'm going to deploy today. So I can take this wiring diagram and send this right now to my facilities team so they can prepare to cable this fabric. Here's also a graphical implementation of that. I can see this is demo spine 1, so this is my Z9000 spine. I can see which port is cabled to which other switch on which port on that switch, so on and so forth. Basically just a graphical representation of that wiring plan we just saw. There's spine 2. Here's leaf 1, that 4810 in the top of rack. These downlinks are going to the servers, and these 40 gig QSFP uplinks over here are going to the spine, and I can see which ports on this spine switches they go to. So that's cool. I'll minimize that and we'll close this out. Okay, now we're done with the design. So what I'm going to do now is begin the deployment. So I'm going to go to step 2 here, which is the pre-deployment configuration. So I'm going to start that. Here's the demo fabric I just designed. I'll choose that and click OK. Click Next here. Okay, so now DFM wants to know what is the actual MAC address of these switches that we're going to use. So I've got a CSV file here that was provided to me by Dell when I purchased these switches. I'll open that up and upload it. You can see the upload was successful, and now I'm going to choose the action button next to each switch name, and I'm going to choose the MAC address, and I'll just proceed down the list here. Spine 2, okay, we're done. Now we can see that the MAC address in that file was auto-populated, as well as the serial number of that switch. If there was a service tag in there too, that would show up as well. So we're done with that. We'll click Next. Okay, so now let's provide some information about the out-of-band management subnet. What's the default gateway on there? In my Dell Solution Center lab, it's 172.25.188.1. And the route that we're going to put on the switches for the management interface is just a default route pointing to that default gateway. So I'm just going to do my quad zeros and a /0 there. Now I'm going to provide a range of addresses for DFM to provide to the switch management interfaces. So I'm just going to put 172.25.191.1/22. I'm going to check this column here to highlight all of those switches and autofill. So what's happened here is DFM has just automatically provisioned an IP address for each management IP for each switch. So that's what we want. We'll click Next. All right, now we're going to tell DFM what software to load on the Z9000s and the S4810s. So remember here, this is our TFTP server here, which also happens to be the same machine. But I have a TFTP server running here. And for the Z9000, it's going to be z9000.bin. And for the 4810, it's going to be s4810.bin. So when our switches are booted up by Dell Fabric Manager, they will download this image from the TFTP server as instructed. Click Next. Okay, now DFM is transferring some TFTP configurations to the some switch configurations to the TFTP server. And DFM also auto-generated a DHCP server configuration to assist in bootstrapping these switches with the config. So I can see that here. And I'll just click Next. Now at this point I can also see where those routers are connected to, where I should connect them. So I can see that the router with the remote IP address of 10.253.1.2 should be connected to demo leaf 1 on port 047, so on and so forth. I can also click here and look at the downlinks. These are the links connecting the servers, and I can see which ports are configured with which VLAN, and also what the IP range is on those ports as well. So I have all that information. I'll click Next here. Okay, we're done with this phase of the pre-deployment. That looks good. We'll click Finish. All right, now we're ready for the pre-deployment. This is where the switches boot up for the first time and get the software loaded and get a basic configuration applied. So now I'm going to minimize my Dell Fabric Manager. I'm going to go back to my 4 switches. Here's my 2 leaf switches, my 2 S4810s. Here's my 2 Z9000 spine switches. And what I'm going to do is basically reload these switches as if they were powered on for the first time and installed in the rack and connected to the management subnet. So this would be, similar to that out-of-box experience of powering on the switch for the first time. So now that everything is set up with DFM and everything's ready to go, we will go ahead and power these switches on for the first time. So there is leaf 1 getting installed in the rack. Let me do the same thing for leaf 2. And let's go get our Z9000 powered on and installed in the rack. So I'll just do a reload here again. And Z9000 spine number 2. We'll do the same thing here. I'll just do a reload. Okay. So it's as if these switches have been powered on for the first time and connected to the management subnet. These switches will now boot up and obtain an IP address from the DHCP server, and we'll download the FTOS image that we provided in our previous screen there in Dell Fabric Manager. And then the switches are also going to download a basic configuration that will apply SNMP settings. It'll provide a username and password, and it will provide an IP address on the management interface and also provide an IP address for loopback interface. That's it. No additional configuration at this point in time. Once we're done with the pre-deployment, then we'll proceed to the full deployment of the core, and that is when DFM will go back to each switch and do a full configuration. So we'll wait just a minute here for these switches to boot up. Okay, here we are a couple minutes later. The switches have booted up with their initial configuration. I can see that here in the console messages. The downloaded config from DHCP server is being applied. I can see that here, here, on all the switches. So we should have that initial configuration. And I can see that by looking at the host names that have already been provided on these switches. Spine 1, Spine 2, Leaf 1, and Leaf 2. I can log into these switches now with the same credentials that we saw in the administration screen in DFM, and I could do a, let's see, a show run int loopback 0. We can see we have a loopback address there, so that's good. We can see that. So Leaf 1 is that address. Let's look at Leaf 2. Show int loopback 0. Show run int loopback 0. And this one is 10.254 1.4, so you can see how DFM used those addresses, that range of addresses I provided in the design section. Now I shouldn't be able to ping from one switch to the next because the fabric has not been fully constructed yet. So if I did a 10.254 1.3, if I tried to have this switch ping the other, no, not there yet. So that's fine because we haven't fully deployed the fabric yet. So now let's go back to DFM and let's do the deployment to the core. Whoops. Okay, let's go back to DFM and do the deployment of the core. So now I'm going to click Deploy Core. Here's my demo core that we've been working with. I'll click OK there. We'll click Continue. Okay, so now all I have to do in this phase here is look at the switches that we have been working with so far. I can see the name of the switch that DFM has assigned. I can see the model number of each switch. I can see their MAC address, IP address, serial number, etc. That looks good. So now I'm just going to check this column here to auto-select all of those switches, and I'm going to click on Deploy Selected. Now once I do this, DFM is going to log into these 4 switches, is going to tell the switch to download its configuration from the TFTP server and then reboot. And then when the switches reboot, DFM will go back and validate that the configuration was properly deployed and all the cabling is correct too. So here we go. I'm going to click Deploy Selected. Do you want to deploy these nodes? Yes. And deploy initiated successfully. So if we go back here to our consoles, we can see DFM has logged in and has begun to done its work of rebooting the switches with a full configuration. So this should take just a minute, and we will come back and look at what the result was in just a minute. Okay, here we are a couple minutes later. Our switches have fully rebooted with the proper FTOS image, and we can also see that the full fabric configuration has been applied. I can just tell right now from the console messages, messages around OSPF, changing state from loading to full, that all looks good. That's exactly what we want to see. So let me go ahead and take a look now at what happened. So here's my Leaf 1 and Leaf 2. I'll go back to Leaf 1 and log in. We can see at this point, show run OSPF. There we have a full OSPF configuration. And we can just verify again on this switch down here, Leaf 2. Show run OSPF. That looks good. Fabric is fully deployed. Now, I should be able to ping from one switch to the next now. If I do a show run int loopback 0, this guy, Leaf 2, is 1.4. Show run int loopback 0. Leaf 1 is .3, so I will now ping 10.254.1.3. And we're good. Fabric is deployed. Here's my spine switch, my Z9000. We'll take a look at this switch. And here again, we have a full OSPF configuration. I can do a show IP route, and I have a full routing table pre-configured for this fabric. So at this point, I'm done with the deployment phase. Now one thing that we're going to see here in a minute is that Dell Fabric Manager is going to go back to these switches, log in, and validate the configuration. So if I go back to Dell Fabric Manager here to my deployment screen, I can see that the deployment is still in progress, and what we're waiting for now is for DFM to do the validation. So we'll see that happen in just a minute here. Okay, I can see from the console screens in the background there that DFM is logged in, and yes, we can see from DFM that the Fabric deployment was completed. We have our green check mark. I can scroll over the side here and see deployment status was success, validation was a success. So DFM went back and made sure that the proper config was there and that all of the cabling was correct too. It checked the neighbor tables on all of the switches to make sure that the cabling was done correct. So at this point, we have successfully deployed our leaf spine data center fabric with Dell Fabric Manager, and I never once had to type in any OSPF configuration commands. I never had to spend hours at a CLI doing that. And now I can go into DFM and kind of take a look at my design here on the cores menu. I can click on my demo core, and I can go back and review my topology. I can see that the entire fabric is healthy, and I can click on the different switches here and see the ports and get various performance data too from each of these interfaces as the fabric is running. Okay, now we're going to look and see what happens when a switch configuration is changed outside of the auspices of Dell Fabric Manager. So I'm going to go to this leaf switch here, leaf 1, and I'm just going to make just a little minor change. It may not be enough to break the fabric, but it could cause a performance problem maybe, right? So I'm going to go into, let's see, router OSPF 1, and I'll say no passive interface VLAN 10. All right, and then I'll get out of there. So I've went in outside of DFM and I've changed the configuration of the switch. What's going to happen is DFM is always going to periodically validate the fabric. Every 15 or 30 minutes, I believe, is a default. But I can also go back into my core deployment menu here, click on my core, click on deploy, and then just say deploy and validate. And I'll just run through the validation process again. I can check all of these switches and click on Start Validation. So what's going to happen now, as you can see in the background, DFM is logged into those switches again and is going to validate that the configuration and cabling meets the policy. And we can see right here that leaf switch 1 has errored out. So what happened there? If I scroll over, I can see wiring success, configuration error. So then what I can do is click on the Errors tab, move to the Configuration Errors drop-down box. I can check Leaf 1 and view the mismatch. What we're seeing here on the left side is the planned configuration. This is the configuration that is in the DFM database. So this is the configuration that the switch should have. In the middle here is the configuration that was discovered. And on the right side, we will see what the delta is. So I can scroll down and see that, oh, here's the change statement here, passive interface VLAN 10. And I can move up here and see, yep, looks like the discovered configuration is missing that statement. So I can go back and manually make that correction. DFM is not going to auto-correct the configuration, it's just going to warn you. So I can go back in here and fix it. Router OS PF1 passive interface VLAN 10. And I could go back and rerun the validation again. And in just a second here, we should see it come back with a success message, and it did. So we're back in compliance now on demo leaf 1. Everything looks good. Fabric is deployed, and it's been validated. And that validation will be ongoing every 15 or 30 minutes. So if anybody makes a config change that's out of policy, we're going to know about it. Okay, now let's see how easy it is to add new switches to the fabric. Remember, before I had 96 additional server ports I planned as an expansion. Well, I'm at the point now where I'm ready to add those additional server ports, add those additional switches. So I've procured them, and let's go ahead and deploy those into our demo fabric that we've been working with. So I'm going to click on Cores, Core Deployment. I'm going to select our existing demo core, clicked on Design, Expand. You can click Next here, and we're going to review the configuration settings of our design with nothing really we need to change here. We're working with the same design. Now DFM is asking how much expansion do you want to do? Well, I'm not going to add any uplink ports, so I'll add 0 there, but I'm going to add 96 more downlinks, which translates into 2 new 4810 leaf switches. Click refresh total here. I can see the new updated port count of my fabric, and I can see what the fabric is capable of expanding to in the future. We'll just click Next here. Nothing to change on the interlink configuration, that can stay the same. We'll click Next. Nothing needs to change on the existing uplinks. We'll just click Next there. And nothing needs to change on the downlink configuration. We're just adding additional capacity to the configuration we already put in place. So we'll just click Next here. And the topology will be shown, which now shows leaf 3 and leaf 4 with a blue plus sign. These are the new switches. Remember, before they were grayed out. So I can click on leaf 3, leaf 4. I can see the topology and see how everything it looks when it's cabled up. Everything looks good. So I'm going to click Next. And here again is a quick review of all of the design parameters that we've been putting in, including our new updates. Everything looks fine there. I'll just click Finish. And do I want to view an updated wiring plan? Yes, let's go ahead and look at that. So let's look at both table data and a graphical wiring plan. A new PDF file has been downloaded to my laptop. Let's take a look at that. And we can see here that we have an updated wiring plan with the switches that I already have, spine 1, spine 2, leaf 1, and leaf 2, but also the new switches. Here I can see leaf 3 and leaf 4 and how they're cabled to the spine switches on which ports. So I now have an updated wiring plan for the fabric auto-updated for me, and I can scroll down and see the graphical implementation of that. There's spine 1, spine 2. I can see the new ports that need to be cabled with the plus sign in the blue here. These are going to leaf 3 and leaf 4. I can see which port is connecting to which other port. And I can scroll down and see the new leaf switches. They should be at the bottom here. Yep, here's leaf 3. These are all the server ports, the downlinks, and here's the new 40 gig uplinks going to spine 1 and spine 2 on the appropriate ports. So everything has been auto-updated. That looks good. I'll just minimize that. We'll close this. And we'll continue to the deployment. So I'm going to highlight the fabric name here, Demo. I'm going to click on Deploy, Pre-Deployment. We'll click Next here. Now here's the part where we need to identify our new switches with their MAC address. So I'm going to choose my CSV file that has my MAC addresses. Click Upload. I'll just click the plus sign here next to leaf 3, and this one here is leaf 3, and leaf 4 is this guy right here. Okay, I'm all set. Got my MAC addresses in there for the new switches. We'll click Next. And now I just need to provide some IP addresses for those new switches. 172.25.191.5 because I left off at .4 on the last switch. So I'm going to put in .5 and then /22. And I'll check the new switches here and click Autofill. And there they have a IP address for their management interface. Looks good. We'll click Next. Nothing needs to change on the software. We're going to use the same FTOS software images, so I'll just click Next there. DFM is now creating switch configurations and transferring them to the TFTP server, and is also updating my DHCP configuration as well for the new switches. So I can see down here in my DHCP config, there's leaf 3, there's leaf 4, their MAC address of each switch, the IP address they've been assigned for the management interface, the configuration file they will download from TFTP, as well as the FTOS image. So that looks good. I'll just click Next. Just a review here on the uplinks, nothing's changed there. We'll click next. Looks like we're finished here. Success, good, we'll click finish. Okay, so that's a pre-deployment. Now I'm going to go to the console screens of Leaf 3 and Leaf 4. And these are blank switches that I just procured. So if I do a show startup configuration, you can see there's nothing there. So I'm just going to reload these switches just like I did with the other ones to simulate that out-of-box experience powering it on for the first time in the rack. So reload that switch, and we'll reload this switch here as well. So now what's going to happen is these switches will reboot. They'll consult DHCP. They'll get their IP address. They'll get the link to download their FTOS image from TFTP. And then we'll be ready to proceed with the full deployment after that. So this will take just a couple minutes, and then we'll resume from here. Okay, we're back. Our switch have rebooted, and they have got their initial config from the pre-deployment. I can see that with the host names here of Leaf 3 and Leaf 4. We'll just log in to validate these. I can see that an IP address has been assigned to the loopback address. Now there is no OSPF configuration, but there is an SNMP configuration there for DFM to access SNMP. There also is usernames and passwords supplied so DFM can SSH and access the switch. So we're all set. Now we will go to DFM and complete the deployment. So I'll highlight my design here. We'll click on deploy and deploy and validate. Click continue. And I can see the other switches that are already there in my fabric, and I can see the new switches here, Demo Leaf 3 and Demo Leaf 4. Their model numbers, MAC address, IPs, serial numbers. So what I'll do is I'll just check Leaf 3, I'll check Leaf 4, and click on Deploy Selected. Do I want to deploy? Yes. Deployment initiated. And let's go back to our console screens, and we should see both Leaf 3 and Leaf 4 rebooting to get their full fabric configuration. So this will take another couple minutes while these switches reboot to get their full configuration, and then we'll validate the fabric when that's done. Okay, we can see our switches, Leaf 3 and Leaf 4, have rebooted. It looks like they have their full fabric configuration. Now I can see all of the OSPF messages on the console. That looks good. I can, just for the sake of the demo, log in and verify. Let's do show run OSPF. Yep, my OSPF config is there. How about show IP route? And there's my full fabric routing table. We can see all of the interlink IP addresses, as well as the 10254 is the loopback addresses of the other switch. So I should be able to ping all of the other loopback addresses of the other switches. Yep, 1.1, 1.2 looks good, 1.3 looks good, 1.4 looks good. How about 1.5? Looks good. 1.6. Boom. Fabric is fully operational. Everything looks excellent. So in a minute here, DFM is going to come back to these switches and again validate their configuration and validate the cabling. So we can go back to our screen here at DFM. We can see we're just waiting at this point for DFM to come back and validate the config. So we'll see that happen in a second here. And there we go. We can see Leaf 3 and Leaf 4. Status completed, device deployment success, validation success. So I can see my entire fabric here, Leaf 1, 2, 3, 4, Spine 1, Spine 2, all completely deployed, full fabric configuration, and validated. So now we can close this here, and we can go back to our menu of core, click on core, and I can look at my topology here, and we can see all of the switches, Spine 1, Spine 2, Leaf 1, 2, 3, and 4. The green check mark next to each switch indicates that everything is healthy. There's no errors, there's no validation problems. The fabric is operational. And we can click on the additional switches and see the status of each port. We can even drill down into performance data if we wanted to. So that concludes the demonstration of Dell Fabric Manager. Thank you for watching.